we're going to start the meeting. Fred Thiel will be attending tonight, but he just had to come a little bit later, and we don't want to hold the meeting up any longer. And my name's Janice Landis, for those of you who don't know me. I'm currently the president of the Hampton Bays Civic Association. I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight on such a hot, humid evening. We really appreciate your attendance. I'm really excited about the program that we have tonight. It's going to basically be an informal discussion, but we have Mary Wilson, who's project manager for the CPF fund, Janice Scher, who's assistant long-range planning for the town of Southampton, and we want to get into just a discussion of the CPF, its mission, its protocols, its accomplishments, and what we hope for the future. And of course, we want as much participation from the audience as possible. What I'm going to do first, though, is ask everybody to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, and then afterwards I'll launch into just a little housekeeping. Thank you. Okay, for those of you who weren't here, our last meeting was about wind farms, and it was quite an interesting and scintillating discussion, pros and cons. And we have minutes of it at the front desk. We also have them available online, and it's something to just think about for the future. Now, what I had asked Janice, if she would be kind enough, back in April, again, for those of you who haven't attended, we invited Tom Neely from the Southampton Town Traffic and Transportation and Safety Director to talk about the potential for enhanced bike paths, bike lanes, and sidewalks. And as a result of our interest and other groups' interests, a working group for bike paths was formed, to the point now where I believe, and Janice can fill you in, there is a plan to connect Good Ground Park and Red Creek Park in the town. I don't know where we're at, and you can let us know. Was looking to get grants to facilitate that. The Civic Association Board of Directors submitted a letter in support. Copies of that are at the front desk also and online if you'd like. So Janice, if you wouldn't mind, give us a few words.
Sure. Thank you, Janice. Good evening, folks. How you all doing? Thanks for having us here. And right, so a lot of interest going on in obviously transportation alternatives like bike lanes for transportation and recreation, and sometimes they're the same and sometimes they're different. So a group formed, as Janice mentioned, a task force sort of that is made up of interested community members. I see Andy Morris in the audience, he's on it. Some cross-pollination of the Sustainability Committee and the Transportation Commission, and some planners, myself, Dave Wilcox, Mike Lieberman, and Tom Neely, and we've all been there trying to work through how this would work in segments, like achievable pieces that would add up to a connective network. And while we're just talking about this, although much work has been done in the past, the South Fork Bikeway was one of the a major federal grant that the town received, and that was on-street biking. A lot of interest lately is on off-street networks. So while we were having these meetings, the grant opportunity arose, so we thought, let's get that applied for and see how we do. One of the more manageable, easier segments happened to be in Hampton Bays, which connects Red Creek Park to Good Ground Park. And then part of Good Ground Park's master plan is to have a bike path, a multi-use path for walking, bicycling, stroller, whatever, through the park. So we tried to, we always try to get grant money for these projects, so we applied for the multi-use path through Good Ground Park to connect to on Old Riverhead Road. There's quite a wide lane there, and we could just easily accomplish it with different ways of a dedicated bike lane striping, and then reflectorized markers that go under the Sunrise Highway Bridge and connecting it down. So we hope we're successful. We hope we would get the grant. It would, you know, be $1 million grant from the state. So we're hoping, and as it goes on, we'd like to continue to apply for these as any opportunities come up. So we're working with whomever wants to be involved to identify these obvious segments that we can then implement into usable paths and connect them. So that's the status. We just applied in August.
Well, thank you. Do you know how long it'll take before you hear anything back?
I believe the awards are in December.
Mm-hmm. Are there any questions? No? Right. I forgot to mention we're being CTV was kind enough to videotape us tonight. So any questions we'd like posed at the mic because of the taping.
Hi, Jens.
Hi, Mary.
So just for sake of clarity, I'll just call that phase 1 of the bike
Yeah.
initiative.
Oh, yeah.
So could you enlighten us of their thoughts as to what phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, phase 5, or what the future plans would be?
Sure. So other entities out there are trying to work on creating bike paths out of utility line, power lines, easements, and things like that. And our idea is sometimes those power lines are real far out of the way, and we're more interested in sort of within hamlets and connecting hamlets. And so obviously the steps are, there's a lot already done in most of our hamlet studies. They already identify these pathways, and there's also just riders who know, you know, how they want to connect. So the long-term plan is to look at the utility easements and the MTA right-of-ways, because I mean, you can get from Hampton Base to East Quogue, just on the MTAs. They have like this like dirt path that connects the whole. If you looked at it on an aerial, it's obvious, you know. So we would like to work with the MTA to get those kinds of intra-hamlet connections, and then when you're in a hamlet, obviously if you can get from Red Creek to Good Ground, down Ponquag to the ocean, to the Maritime Park at the canal, like that's always, and I reiterate this every time I'm here, that's our goal, is to connect that triad of downtown, the ocean, and the Shinnecock Canal.
The bike path that would go from Hampton Base to East Quogue along the railroad tracks was something that, you know, was in the 10-year or the master plan for a long time. So, I mean, are there any, I guess what I'm asking, is there a schedule of some kind, or is this just like, and I don't mean this in a negative way to say haphazard, but, you know, is it just like, oh, we'll do this piece, and then, I don't know, what piece pops up next, we'll do that, or do you have a more cohesive plan where it's like, okay, we do this, and then phase 2, we're going to work on this section, so we have to do studies for that, and then, so is there a schedule of some kind, or a
We're
something more
actually trying to
cohesive?
work that through that
Okay.
committee, and you should join.
I should. I think
You're
that
welcome
the
to.
Civic is represented by another board member usually at the
There
bike
is a gentleman
trails,
that
right?
comes,
Scott
yes.
usually goes.
Scott attends, and I believe Ken
Yeah.
attends.
Ken,
Oh,
and
okay.
John,
There he is, yeah.
and I believe John.
Oh, there you are.
Oh.
Yes.
Yeah. Scott Denuc. Ken,
Good. Yeah, no, I
Ken
think they
Denuc.
do attend, so I.
So the
yeah.
idea is to sort of identify these segments, identify how they connect, identify like a sort of a tiered approach as to the easy, low-hanging fruit, and then there's the more difficult things where we're dealing with the bureaucracy of LIPA or the MTA, and those things are not as easy as they are when they're under town control. So we're parsing out which ones can we directly deal with, and then which ones do we have to talk to others and work through that. So in that way, yes, we are working to a phased plan with, you know, obviously the best laid plan, you know, the schedules are hard to nail down, but yeah. But we applied for the grant because it popped up, and we were like, just, you know we've always been talking about this, so we went for it.
And Andy's here, and he was profiled on the front page of the Southampton Press at one point with he has some terrific ideas about this
Thanks,
issue.
Jen. The recent efforts by Southampton Town are being noticed, and it's long overdue and appreciated again. One question I have for the CPF, I'm just going to read a statement. Southampton towns and East Hampton towns also really could use county-wide connected off-road bike paths for healthy recreation and safe commuting between the communities. There's currently an organized effort initiated by Governor Cuomo's office to connect multi-use off-road trails from Albany to Buffalo and New York City to Canada, titled the Empire State Trail. There's now plans to connect New York City to the proposed Long Island extension by utilizing what we just mentioned, the existing LIPA power lines in Long Island Railroad utility corridor, dirt road right-of-ways in Southampton and East Hampton towns, all the way to Montauk Point. Question: is it possible to use CPF funds to support any land acquisition to create a 50-mile plus long linear park for the community's benefit to make this happening? By the way, Bicycle Magazine selected Suffolk County as the worst area in the United States for cycling.
I believe it. Sometimes I ride my bike to the office, so I believe it.
The question is, can CPF funds be used to support this type of effort?
CPF funds can be used for property identified in the CPF project plan, which is broken into target areas. There is a target area for trails. It doesn't specifically say bike trails, but it is for trails, and they've been identified linking throughout the town. I don't see why that can't be part of the trail target area and be added if parcels come up that help fill it in. Similar to the Pominock Path. There's been efforts to complete that. It's a little difficult in our town, and we prioritize pieces to finish up that trail linkage, and it could be the same thing. I don't see why not.
Well, hope we keep the effort going. Thank you.
Andy, I have a question. Do you have particular parcels in mind with regards to this? I mean, besides the general right-of-way type situation?
Well, the LIPA power lines, which run every community on Long Island, they connect them. And right now, they're just basically dirt roads that are full litter and not even used any, but just pickup trucks by the
But they wouldn't be purchased with CPF funds. They're already public.
Right, I
you
don't
know.
think we could acquire.
You wouldn't acquire, those are utility owned.
Right, that's what I
We
mean.
might be able to
We'd
get
want
an
an
easement,
agreement. Yeah.
an easement agreement to go.
Somebody
across.
agreement, yeah,
Yeah.
because, you know, utility corridors are being used on Long Island, you know, Bethpage Parkway, upstate New York, other states. This is a pretty common way of using, you know, public corridors for the public benefit, because it makes sense. They're sitting there and not being used by anybody other than, you know, if you go like Deerfield Road, you can see the power lines. They go through the woods, 100-foot wide swath, and nobody's using it. It says keep out.
Yeah.
And it connects every community out here.
So would that be, just to, you know, to elucidate myself, would that be just getting wouldn't entail any kind of monetary? It would be just getting an agreement, or would they ask for financial remuneration?
I think that it would be an easement, but the tricky parts are where LIPA doesn't actually own certain parcels. They themselves have an easement, and so the question is, can they convey the easement to others? And that's
Right.
beyond me. That's a legal thing. So I don't know, but that's the kind of thing that we're working through. That's the type of thing. So we've mapped out which ones do LIPA own fee simple, which ones are ones where they have an easement. So that's kind of how we're parsing them out to understand what we're dealing with, because you have to look at the whole as a whole of who owns what, and then obviously there has to be cooperation in any case of a willing landowner if you need to cross private property in this network. So the easements on the LIPA lines are the easiest, but to some regard, except for where they don't own it. But when it comes to, you know, like I'm talking about like around a hamlet, you know, when you get into right-of-way issues and things like that, that's where it becomes a little more onerous.
Now, I just got back from Nova Scotia, and I know they have they've used the railroad right-of-ways up there. A lot of them are not being used anymore, and they have a terrific, you know, mapping of bike paths via that, you know, way.
And one of in Bridgehampton, we have an old railroad spur on the west side of Bridgehampton Sag Harbor Turnpike, and we would love to apply for that as well to improve that segment, because you could theoretically get from Bridgehampton train station up that spur to like the Children's Museum and the South Fork Museum and things like that. So we would, you know, that's another one that is ready to go, town owned. We can, you know, so we're trying to figure out which ones are like those.
Lots of potential.
There is.
Let's think positive,
Absolutely.
right? And if someone's negative about it, maybe we can just say eminent domain or something like that.
We'll see how it goes.
Any other questions?
My question is, the high-tension wires, have you been through them, like in Watermill and Bridgehampton? Because a lot of those roads back there, I mean, I've been on them and driven on them years ago, and they're not really safe for bicyclists, let alone people walking. So if you did get those ways so that we could use them for biking or hiking, who would make them so they were manageable, so you actually could ride your bicycle?
That's what I'm talking about, like, so we have to find money, or the town board would have to appropriate money for capital projects. So our goal is to always find free money wherever we can via grants, to do that. And, you know, there's the Empire State Trail, there's all these other entities that are also trying to push this effort forward. So.
And has your group actually walked these trails and walked the potential trails to see if there are any dangers or whatever to the community if they were opened up for the bike
We're not
roads?
that far down the road
You're
yet.
not that- okay.
No. But, I mean, a lot of people have, but me personally, I have not.
Okay, thank you.
Isn't there a security issue with these right-of-ways, like the power lines, the railroad tracks? I mean, what happens with the liability situation?
Well,
I
that's.
mean, you're assuming all these bicyclists are gonna go there, but, you know, you have kids, you have children, you have homeless people. We just had a homeless guy get killed over here in Southampton on the tracks. Has any consideration been given to that?
Well, Ray, we're not talking about on the tracks. If you were to see.
Well, how are you
an
gonna keep
area-
them off the tracks? I mean, you know,
Well, they're not necessarily adjacent, there's like a distance
Well,
between
you'd have to
them
put
and
some
the
type
track.
of fence
Yeah,
then, right?
Yeah, it all
And
has to get
who's-
designed. So you have to design it, like I'm saying, in manageable segments, and then understand the overall goal. If there's a fence needed, you know, there's all these design criteria by other people.
Yeah, but I mean,
that can do
the
this.
consideration, like, these tracks and the right-of-ways, the electrical lines have to be serviced. So, I mean, I don't think that the utilities are gonna be so thrilled about putting up fences, making it incumbent them to get at these things.
They may or may not let us use them. That's why we're not entirely focused on just that.
Okay, just a thought.
Yeah.
Going back to the Good Ground Park, the one you actually, well, just two questions. Going back to the Good Ground Park, when I was actually here from that meeting, and the overwhelming support for the bike path, I don't know if the gentleman was here, was actually to extend from Main Street to the beach. That seemed to be where the initial support was. So I'd like to understand what the $1 million value is between a bike path that you have to drive to the Good Ground Park or Red Creek Park and go about a half a mile. So I'm trying to understand the cost of $1 million to build this bike path between those two parks, which you, I don't know if you, and walking it, have you walked, have you tried to actually get across Old Country Road?
It's Old Riverhead Road. Yeah.
Old Riverhead Road. I live on Squiretown.
Yeah.
So you can't even walk there, much less have a bike. There's a little bike path, but you really
Well,
can't
that's,
take a bike.
yeah, the idea is to re-stripe the whole thing, so you would have a dedicated bike lane.
But you can't have it on Squiretown, so no Riverhead, right, dedicated to the crossing. You have to cross Old Riverhead, right?
Yeah.
So, and to, for $1 million value between those two parks.
The $1 million value is the cost it takes to, and we have to use prevailing wage. There has to be, you know, set,
No, again, the utilization, so you have to drive to Good Ground Park or Red Creek Park.
why do you have to drive there? There's a
Well,
lot of people and kids that go there
How
without
can you,
driving.
how can you get there by bike? There's no bike path to get you to, but that's my point, to get you to.
Isn't
Red-
that the point of what we're doing?
No, but, no, I'm asking you, where is this, where, I looked at the map.
Yeah.
And the map, a lot of the paths were in Good Ground Park and Red Creek Park, not actually miles and miles of bike path on the street.
Yeah, there's not miles and miles that we're proposing. It's a simple segment that connects Red Creek Park via Old Riverhead Road, which is now bike route, but now would have the 4-foot wide bike lane.
Which is only a couple of yards, 100 yards.
It's not a couple hundred yards. It's much more than that. It's several. You know, we've measured it. I don't have the numbers on me, but it's down Old Riverhead Road under the Sunrise Highway Bridge,
A tenth of a
down
mile? A couple hundred
Squiretown,
yards.
and through Good Ground Park to North Main Street, and then from there to Main Street. So that's a significant amount of distance.
And you have a two-lane, there's an impossible, no matter how much you mark it off, you're not gonna extend the width of Squiretown Road. to
We're
make
not
it
even
safe.
going down Squire Town.
You just said you were. You just said the
Oh,
bike.
it's like I
Yeah,
guess
I
it's
know,
a
right up by,
little bit,
I saw the
yeah.
map, that's what I'm saying, so it's not Squiretown Road, it's just that little, I used to live on Old Riverhead Road. So it's Old Riverhead Road by Rolling Hills, Red Creek Park, it's a couple hundred yards, and it's $1 million. And for people to have to drive, I'm just making a comment,
There's,
I don't know
we're
if there's
going
overwhelming.
through Good Ground Park, which is like at least 5,000 feet, and dealing with
Couple
clearing,
hundred,
grubbing,
as I said,
getting
couple
all the
hundred.
way through the park.
Right.
The surface for the trail,
I understand that.
you know. We
but-
costed it out based on the state's costs, so that's how much it cost.
And again.
Believe it or not, a mile of sidewalk is $1 million.
I understand that. A mile of sidewalk would get people from south of Montauk Highway to Main Street and have that. Here you're in a park. I'm just making a comment that I don't know if you have the overwhelming support you believe you had for this
I
mile.
know you don't support it, but that, I did
Well,
talk
There was
to
only a
many
couple of
that
people
did.
here at that meeting, and that wasn't I was here at that meeting a couple of months ago. And the-
There were quite a few people at the meeting. Also, I think what was discussed at the meeting
Right,
is,
were there 20 people at the meeting? There was like 20 people at the meeting.
I wouldn't say it was, you can't go by a meeting,
I
It's
just-
plebiscite that-
And there was
Excuse me.
and there was no poll taken. And there was no poll
But
taken.
if we waited for 100% consensus from everybody, we would never do anything.
Not 100%
So, I mean,
consensus,
that's
but
just
see,
how
you
it
didn't even,
works.
you didn't even put out a survey to say, so you got, where would you like the starting point of an additional sidewalk?
We have a bike task force of people who we did talk to, and we collectively agreed that that was a good start.
That was after the $1 million, you agreed to the $1 million. At least
We
that's
didn't
what
agree
the-
to anything, and we don't even know if we got the grant.
and I think one thing that people have to, point was taken out, bike lanes are under the purview of the highway department, bike trails and paths are under a separate purview. And so that, and what, ideally, I agree with you, Gail, that I would love to see more sidewalks and
More
bike lanes.
sidewalks,
But
exactly,
it's
bike
like
lanes.
3 parts, because it's the highway department, and correct me
Right.
when I go off kilter. The highway department is in control of bike lanes and sidewalks, I
Right.
believe. So that, this is like the beginning, and there'll be, hopefully it'll be
I do
built
understand,
on.
and I'm not against it, I'm not saying I'm against it, I'm just saying, again, it's kind of like a corrupt process where there's a discussion of overwhelming support of things in this community in Hampton Bays, when there is really no proof to overwhelming support for $1 million, and I'm an accountant, so I'm
Okay.
just putting it out there,
Thank you.
okay?
Alrighty, then I think unless anybody else has a comment, we'll move along. I think with that, we'll go into the main body of the program. And again, as I said, what we thought with so many exciting things going on with CPF, particularly the fact with the last referendum that now 20% of the money can be used for water mitigation purposes. Correct me if I'm misphrasing this. We thought it was just a wonderful point in time to sort of give an overview of the program and then have your questions. So with that, I'll ask Mary Wilson, if you'd be so kind as to begin the program.
I'd love to. Thank you, Janice, and thank you for inviting me to be here. CPF was started in 1998. The voters approved by referendum this groundbreaking program. This community should be very proud of itself. It's been an overwhelmingly successful program for land acquisition. So since 1998, it's been an overwhelming success, such that we have voted several times to extend it. So now this program goes all the way till 2050. So we will be collecting the 2% transfer tax on all real estate conveyances in the town through 2050. We have this new component that Janice spoke of, which is called the Water Quality Improvement Project. Janice has been instrumental, Janice Shearer, in helping me with this program. Before I get to that, I just want to touch on some CPF highlights that you may or may not be aware of that are recent here. We acquired the Lobster Inn properties, part of them. It was kind of a complicated project. We acquired some open space in that area. We acquired part of the property for potential water quality improvement, a neighborhood sewage treatment system, possibly in the future. So we've reserved an acre of the property for that. Got a few acres of open space, and then we acquired the development rights on another area of it where a third party owns the underlying fee title and is going to be doing aquaculture, which is the first time that we have done any preservation regarding aquaculture. which is considered by the state to be part of agriculture. We also acquired the marina. We did not acquire the restaurant building. That was acquired by the third party who's going to use the restaurant building in connection with the aquaculture facility. So that's a very interesting project. That property was approved for 24 townhouses, I believe.
Yeah, 20 plus 5, 25.
25 townhouses. So now it's going to be a very interesting public/private aquaculture facility and open space. So stay tuned. That might take some while to get off the ground, but it's going to be very interesting, and I really believe it's going to be a great community asset right at the gateway into the Hamptons on 39. If anyone's been down on Dune Road, the former Neptune nightclub, which we don't call it that anymore, we call it the Tiana Life Saving Station, is being renovated back to its 1910 grandeur. It was a life-saving station in commission until 1946. So we are restoring it to that way it looked in 1910. Again, if anyone's been down there, it looks beautiful. It's getting its cedar shingle roof, cedar siding, beautiful historic windows. At the same time, we finally got our approval to demolish the small cottages across the street from Tiana Life Saving Station on the bay. So that has really significantly improved the water quality there, as well as the view. And that two-story blue house that was a little bit further west that was never occupied, if anyone can remember that on the Bayside, that we acquired and also removed. So it's been a great improvement down in that area. Another great improvement that I can report, if you have not seen it yet, please go look, is the former Hidden Cove Motel is finally removed. That was quite a project to get our DEC approvals, to get the contractor, to get it done in the right weather situation. So if you drive down West Tiana, you'll see that that motel complex is gone. The asphalt's gone, the swimming pool's gone. We're doing a wetland restoration in that area. The next phase will be the removal of the properties we bought immediately to the south of that. There's about 4 or 5 structures there that we acquired. Our next DEC permit will be to remove those. So then we'll have 4.5 acres of natural wetlands along West Tiana. It'll be quite beautiful with some public access to walk down to the water. So that's going to be a great improvement on many fronts, including water quality. Those are my most recent updates for Hampton Bays. We're working on enhanced agricultural easements, which you may be aware of. What we do with farmland is we acquire the development rights from the property. The landowner still owns the land, but we buy away the right to develop it or use it for anything but farmland. Now we're doing these enhanced easements where we're telling the farmer, restricting the farmer to only 80% of the property has to be in field crops. So it was in response to some of these preserved farmlands being turned into more of a private, non-agricultural use. This was a way to protect the soil and to protect the productivity so we'd have local food to eat. So that's been very successful. Several farmers have taken advantage of that. That is going to require a lot of attention and management, but they are committed in perpetuity to use that farmland, 80% of the acreage, to grow food. So we're really happy about that. And I think that's going to make a difference again in terms of our soil productivity and having local food to eat, which I think we all appreciate greatly. Janice wanted me to talk a little bit about protocol and how we select properties to be acquired and preserved. State law requires us to have a project plan, which was developed in 1998 and is updated as needed. So all eligible properties are on that plan and part of a target area. We can add new properties, which we do at times. It's a pretty extensive list. And we target sometimes particular properties. We'll reach out to owners. Sometimes the landowners will reach out to us. Sometimes the neighbors will reach out to us. Real estate agents reach out to us. Civic groups. There's so many different ways that the property comes to our attention and through our process. And we appreciate the public, and a lot of the properties come to us through the public and saying, hey, do you know about this property? Or I just saw a for sale sign here. Or I know you're looking at property A, the one next to it would be interesting too. So there's a whole combination of ways that we do acquire property. It's important to remember that this program requires a willing seller. So eminent
eminent domain would never be an issue here. Nobody's ever persuaded to sell their land through CPF. It has to be a willing seller program. We don't target particular hamlets or villages in the town. I find that every month we have a CPF advisory board, and I put together all the proposed properties that have come in for review, and it naturally and organically ends up kind of showing a good view of the whole town. There'll be a few Hampton Bays properties that come in, there'll be some from Noyak, there'll be Spionk, there'll be Sagaponic. It just naturally ends up being a good variety of different properties from different parts of the town, including the villages. I guess I'll go into the water quality now. So we have this new program where we can use up to 20% of the annual funds for what's called water quality improvement projects, which is a huge departure from what this program has been for the past 15 years. We could only use the money in the past to buy dirt, to buy land. This now allows us to actually buy infrastructure, support projects. It's more of a grant program for water quality improvement projects. It can be used to buy land for water quality, but it also can be used for water treatment improvement projects, non-point source abatement and control projects, aquatic habitat restoration projects, pollution prevention projects. So it's a great departure. We spent a lot of time formalizing a grant application with a ranking system. We have a great committee that's dedicated to reviewing these projects. We've got about $11 million per year available for the water quality improvement, be it land acquisition or these other projects that I just outlined, as well as sanitary system upgrade rebates. We started the program by using the rebate system because we had that in place, and that was a good discrete way. We have over $1 million encumbered through rebate applications. It's been very popular. It's taking applicants a while to get through the Suffolk County Health Department system with their new system, but it's been very, very successful. And we continue to do that as part of our water quality. Our first round of grant applications have come in, and we have been hard at work with the committee reviewing those. And they represent homeowner association projects, projects from the villages, projects from the trustees internally, projects from the town internally. Did I miss anyone? Yeah, a few of the villages, 3 different villages propose different types of projects. They focus on non-point source abatement, pollution control, improved drainage infrastructure, sewage treatment elements, PRB, permeable reactive barrier projects. So I think we're off to a really good start with the water quality improvement projects. And as Janice likes to say, we're building the train as we're running down the track. So it's a work in progress. But we have, like I said, a really committed committee of great volunteers with great commitment and expertise that are going to make sure this is a great program.
Could you elaborate on the committee structure? Because I think there's 2 committees, is that correct? One for the open land preservation, one for the water quality?
According to state law, we have to have a CPF advisory board. The advisory board meets once a month, and their job is to make recommendations of land acquisitions to the town board. And the CPF advisory board has been in place since 1998. We established our water quality improvement advisory committee when the new 20% component began. So we've shifted the review of water quality improvement projects to this committee, while leaving the CPF advisory board to continue to do the land acquisition review.
And how many people are on the various committees, and how are they appointed?
Both committees are appointed by the town board. The CPF advisory board has 7 voting members, and I think we've got 4 ex officio at this point. The CPF Water Quality Improvement Advisory Committee has 5 committee members and 2 ex officio members, non-voting.
Who picks the committee members?
The town board. The town board designates them.
And do they have a length of term, and do you have a particular category, say, for a certain type of expertise for each of the five?
The board and committees are selected for a one-year term, calendar year. The state law requires that the CPF advisory board be comprised of folks with land preservation experience and to have at least one farmer. The Water Quality Improvement Advisory Committee is comprised of individuals with expertise in water quality areas such as engineering, hydrogeology, marine biology, environmental sciences, long-range planning.
Thank you.
I have a question.
If you have a question.
What I'd like to know is where does the CPF funds actually repose? Are they commingled with the town money? Are they in a Chase bank account? Or are they, and then that leads me to the second question. I realize that some of the money is used periodically for purchase or whatever, but let's face it, this is a bundle of money. So is it invested while it's not being used? Seems to me it should be like a trust, and there would be an obligation to invest it so that it makes money. And then what's the total now? You said that 20% can be for water quality, and right now 11 million is available for water quality. So does that mean that the total amount in the total fund is 55 million? How much is there now total?
The 20% is based on the last year's total revenue that we had at the time, which was 55 million.
So that's the total amount in the whole fund.
That's the total amount of annual revenue in the last full year.
But what's the total amount actually in the fund from all previous years, and what's the whole ball of wax?
Right now, I believe the available cash is about 60 million
So
available.
so besides the available cash, is there other fund? I'm just trying to ask how much is in the total CPF coffer?
I just told you the available cash. There are some reserves. There is debt service. There is pilot payments that are made, payment in lieu of taxes. Probably another 20 or 30 million of that. So the coffers are probably, all told, 80 million right now.
Okay, so then is that money just sitting around in an account? Is it invested? 80 million isn't being used all at once. So what's going on with that money? And
Municipalities are restricted from certain investment opportunities that the public would be availed to. I am not an accountant or the town controller, so I can't speak to that. I do know that the CPF monies are segregated from other town monies and kept in separate bank accounts. We've got the FDIC, we've got insurance concerns with insuring the money. But I do know that we can't just go out there and let our money grow like other folks can do. We have restrictions.
Well, I'm not sure I agree with that, but, so it's sitting in bank accounts? I'm just asking, where is it? It's sitting in bank accounts?
Yes.
Not commingled with the town funds?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
I've got a couple of questions for you. Number one, when you talk about the Lobster Inn project and you say that there's going to be aquaculture, what are they going to be raising?
I'm not sure what they're going to be raising. They talk about different things. I believe it's going to be fingerlings, like it's going to be the nursery stage of fish. There's been talk of steelhead trout, I believe. Yeah. They've talked about raising kelp. They've talked about raising shrimp. So they've got many, many ideas out there. So
All right, and nothing's been decided yet?
No.
Okay. Then in terms of the farmlands and the agreements that we have to keep them farming, is there any restriction on the pesticides they can use?
There is not. That's something that we've tried to work with the farmers on. We've tried to get farmers interested in restricting their farming to organic, but we have not found a farmer who would be willing to do that. But what they are willing to do is best management practices. Many of our farmers tell me that they farm according to organic standards or even better, but it's so difficult to get certified and to retain certification that they do their own version of best management practices. So I think that's what we're focusing on now, asking the farmers to do best management practices, to do a more sustainable agriculture, to use limited pesticides and herbicides, and I think that's what's happening. They're very expensive to use. They don't have an interest in using more than they have to. So we're hoping to move towards this best management practice where we get them to promise to use the least amount of pesticides and herbicides, et cetera.
And are we monitoring it in any way, or are we just hoping for the best?
We ask in the enhanced easement component, we ask for a conservation plan through the Soil and Water Conservation Organization of Riverhead. So they meet with each individual farmer and assess the property and the soil and give recommendations on how to best take care of the soil. So that becomes part of our baseline documentation, is this conservation plan.
Obviously, it's in their interest to do that.
Yes.
Then in terms of the rebates for the septic systems or
Yes.
sanitary, it's my understanding that the homes or houses has to be a family of more than 2 people. Is that correct?
Not for the town. Apparently Suffolk County offers a grant for those folks who are willing to upgrade their system, and their requirements are more stringent than the town's. They are required to be owner occupied. It can only be single family. We don't have any occupancy requirements. We don't have owner occupancy requirements. It's a lot less stringent.
So a family of 1 or 2, well, family of 1 or 2 could still apply and get a full grant?
Absolutely. I
Okay.
think the town's committed to incentivizing the upgrade of sanitary systems as best as they can.
All right, and lastly, nothing that you've mentioned yet, but I hear talk that the town is going to buy Bel Air Motel and get all the necessary permits, sort of revitalize it, but then put it up for sale so that someone will develop it. Is there a reason it can't be purchased with CPF funds? It's right on the water.
Unfortunately, that hasn't been part of a CPF review. I can't really speak to that. You'd have to ask Supervisor Schneiderman about that project, because it's not in my wheelhouse. at this time.
But would it be something that would be capable of coming under CPF funding?
I don't see why not. It may be similar to Hidden Cove Motel.
That's what I would think.
So if you look at that model, I think you could apply it.
Okay, thanks.
Mhm.
Just as a note of information, September 19th, the CAC is going to have Supervisor Schneiderman, and that's the topic is the Bel Air Cove, the town's plans with it, and also why we can't use CPF funds to purchase it. Okay, I'm reading this. This is from July 12th, 2016, 27 East. And in this article, the town announced that it had made an offer on the 592 acres in East Quogue on Spinney Road. That's the Hills project. And they don't give how much money was offered. The supervisors say it was a significant offer. I had the whisper number was that it was around $38 million. Now, that is a very critical piece of property. It's on a watershed, and I would think that you guys would make more of an effort to acquire it, because I was reading, and just recently, the town spent, your fund spent $10.5 million for 1.25 acres, 1.25 acres for a piece of property in Sag Harbor, which I know very well. And the primary concern there was the water view. And I just don't understand how you came up, I would like you to explain how you gave that valuation of $10.5 million for an acre of land. Who came up with that valuation? And why you didn't increase the offer for the 592 acres, which is on an aquifer, which, you know, here the people in Hampton Bays, the working and middle-class people in Hampton Bays, we have to drink water. Why we didn't get that? I mean, I know the people in Sag Harbor, they were upset about their water view. And my point is, this fund, I think, right now has been corrupted. It doesn't make any sense that you spent $10.5 million for an acre of land. I sold a piece of property that was water view, you know, 200 feet, this is in North Haven, for $1.2 million. I should have sold it to you guys. Really. As a matter of fact, I want to sell my property in Sag Harbor, in Hampton Bays. I have a water view, I have 2 acres.
Okay.
Come on, make me an offer.
Thank you, Ray.
No, I want to hear her answer.
Just give me one moment. I just wanted, stay right there. I just wanted to thank Assemblyman Fred Thiel for coming. Some of you may know that he has been the architect or one of the architects of the originating legislation and also been a driving force behind the referendum with the additional water mitigation effort. So I thank him for coming. I believe he came from another meeting, and I'm sure it's been a busy night. I also want to give a shout out to Scott Horowitz, Secretary Treasurer of the Southampton Trustees, for attending also on this hot, sultry night. Okay, I'll give it
I
back
just
to
got
you.
one more
No,
point.
I'm,
No, let him finish. Go ahead.
okay.
No.
Let me have a sip, you know?
No.
He's a politician, he does enough talking. I'm a citizen. Okay. The second point is, at the same time, this fund spent $900,000 for 5¼ acres over here in Hampton Bays that's going to be a sewage treatment plant. So they got a park for $10.5 million, and we got a sewage treatment plant over here. So I really want to know who determines the prices you're paying for this property, and who really determines what property you're going to buy at the end of the day, which has to be approved by the town council.
That's correct. What we acquire has to be approved by the town board. And I take exception, sir, with your statement that this program has been corrupted. I've been working for this program for almost 17 years, and I feel it has nothing but integrity. You can check with the state controller, and you can check with their audits to see whether or not there is corruption in this program, and there is none. No, please, it's my turn.
I didn't say you're corrupt. I'm just saying you spent $10.5 million.
You said the program's corrupted.
No, it's
so
been
I'm
corrupted
speaking
because
to
the
it.
aims of the program now have been corrupted. It's become politicized. NSA people, I mean,
Ray.
how you came up with that $10.5 million?
Can I just make a point before Mary goes on, is that I think you have to remember, Ray, that the town board also authorized the purchase of 38-acre Good Ground Park and the Shinnecock Maritime Park, which were both purchased with CPF funds. So before you start saying, we got a sewage treatment plant, they got a park, you got 2 parks, and this is something different. So
Don't
just
forget Squiretown Park.
and Squiretown Park. So you're making that assumption and assessment, but I don't think it's fair.
Ray, please, let them finish.
But anyway, back to how it's
Right.
appraised.
Let me speak to your question about how we value the property. I don't choose the numbers. The town board doesn't choose the numbers. We have strict constraints on how we do that. We order 2 independent appraisals of properties. And when I say independent, we hire outside companies to go and do an independent valuation of the property and come back to us with a report. These reports are generally 60 to 80 pages each. They're quite comprehensive. Then it's my job to analyze those reports and go back to the town board to make an offer. So I feel very comfortable that we come up with good numbers. When you see one part of town, you made mention of 1.2 acres in Sag Harbor, $10.5 million. That 1.25 acres can support 7 townhouses. So 7 townhouses in the village of Sag Harbor equal what value? So they look at the townhouses in the immediate community and see what the value is and come up with a number. The Hills, you mentioned the Hills, same thing. We've got 2 appraisals, probably 3 times we've appraised that property over the course of the years. It's got a very big file. Again, how many houses can be there, and what's the going rate for lots and houses in that particular community? So You just can't compare different parts of our town because the markets are so different and the values are so incredibly different. And I feel confident that we're getting good values from our appraisers. We let them do their independent work, come back with the numbers, and they are good, fair market value numbers, and that's what we must use to make our offers.
Yeah, but don't you feel that's a bridge too far? I mean, that's what the fund takes in 1 year, it's around approximately $10 million. So you use 1 year's revenue for one piece of property in Sag Harbor.
No, the fund brings in about $55 million per year.
No, you don't bring in $55 million a year.
Sure they do.
No,
Okay.
the fund does not bring in
Last year it's 56.41 million, Southampton.
So then how come you want to end up, you know, like when this said, in here it says that the fund was at $96 million in 2016. So now it's 2008, that would be another $100 million, and you would be at over $200 million. I don't understand how you figure that. 2016, the number here says $92 million. So if you take in
Well, that's the fund balance. I mean, they're also
all right, so
making
if you took in
expenditures
another,
out of
in
the fund every year, too.
2017, you took in another $55 million, you would
They
be.
took it. You know, I don't know all
Well,
of the
you
numbers in
you're
the
the
town
one that
budget.
said, you take.
Well, I know how much money they took in last year, $56 million.
So what's the total right now with the fund?
I think we answered that
I
question
think we discussed that at the
earlier.
beginning, plus there's outflow also.
Right.
So.
I don't
Yeah.
have it, but I had that figure that it was approximately what it takes in 1 year, so I don't know, I'll stand corrected.
It's
But I still
55
think
million.
$10.5 million, see, the problem is you're giving a valuation of these properties if they're developed. I mean, they're undeveloped properties. I don't understand how this is calculated. And shouldn't the property that's more environmentally critical be weighted more heavily than Sag Harbor's view? That's what I don't understand.
Some people make that argument, but unfortunately, the value is what the market will bear, and the market likes houses.
Ray.
You're saying if it was developed, and that's what you want to put a price tag on it. It's undeveloped property. I don't even know the village was going to allow them to build those townhouses. That's what the problem was.
We do go by the, it's called as-of-right development, and that's just how it works. I mean, that's how the courts have, you know, this is land use. And so things go by as-of-right development. What could they do under the laws that are in place? What could they yield on the property? And we look at that as a reasonable assessment of what could happen on a particular piece of land. In the case of the hills, that's 5-acre zone. So for every 5 acres, you're getting one house. So it's a little different in terms of, you know, the density of Sag Harbor is different, so it's hard to compare.
And a subdivision analysis is done. The costs of building out are backed out of the evaluation to come to your raw acre, what a developer would pay for that land tomorrow.
Hi.
I want to sell my property.
I have a couple questions. You said that there's 11 million for the CPF funds that's going to be dedicated to water quality.
That's available
Is that
this year
correct?
for water
Avail-
quality.
Okay.
Mhm.
So Mecox Bay is having water issues. Western Shinnecock is also. So will some of that money be delegated to the trustees or to the freeholders so that the waters could be cleaned up or Mecox could be open on a normal basis? Will they be allotted some of those funds, the $11 million?
Will the trustees have applied for the grant funding in this first grant round?
Okay, so they have to apply for a grant through the CPF?
Yes.
Is that how that works? Okay.
Yes, everyone does.
Okay, thank you. So my second question is, so the trustees will get money if it's approved, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So my second question is, with the water quality and all the homes that are built around all these freshwater, freshwater ponds and lakes, et cetera, and bays, we have a lot of bacteria, there's a lot of contamination. So why don't as a town, the CPF, is there any way that we could, one thing is Roundup, that's like one of the worst enemies of the environment. Is there any way that the town of Southampton can just say, no more Roundup can be used? I mean, that one thing would solve a lot of problems with our water. I mean, they already won a case that the poor gardener, got cancer from it, so. Is there anything that we can I mean, it's something that we can do as a
I think
town.
through
as-
legislation, you could do something about that, but I don't think through the CPF program per se, you could limit.
But that's something that CPF could, because that's a problem, and that's causing the contamination of our waters. Isn't that something that CPS could present to the board and say, this is one thing that we could do to help our water quality?
I believe if a project came in for water quality improvement that involved the reduction of herbicide use, that's possibly something to look at, certainly.
Okay.
But I would just like to add to that, that we're preempted by the state DEC who regulates pesticide use on Long Island. So a lot of what's going on is because the state allows them to apply pesticides. And even if you had, and I'm all for regulating, I was a pesticide control specialist for the state, and so I have an intimate knowledge of how this works. And however, a law is only as good as its enforcement, so you would have to be going around to people to be, you can start at manufacturing and getting, we used to go to like Home Depot and look at what's on the shelves for purchase by a homeowner. The state does that on a routine basis. They go into Home Depot or whoever sells pesticides and they look at, and they say, this is a restricted pesticide, you're not allowed to have this on Long Island, and we pull it off, and they would pull it off the shelves. So I'm just saying that the town would be trying to get into a regulatory role by saying you can't use Roundup or you can't use X, Y, or Z pesticide, which is a very difficult thing to do. So that there's some definite obstacles with trying to.
But we're doing all these wonderful things, and then we are using pesticides on our lawns and our gardens.
At the
So
moment,
I'm
the
just
best
saying,
thing we
it's
could
just a
do is try
comment.
to educate people to understand what these pesticides are all about, and to try to find ways to use things that are not fertilizer dependent and not, needing tons of pesticides and herbicides.
Thank
So-
you very much.
Janice, then perhaps it's more something that should be addressed on the state level, is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
absolutely. But I mean, if there was some way we can, maybe Fred can talk more about this, if there was
That's
something we could do, to help take
Well, we're
that
just
over
doing
from
all
the
these
state, I don't
wonderful
know.
things, and
Yeah.
that seems to be, one of our biggest
Yeah.
problems out here on Eastern Long Island. We have these beautiful lawns because we don't want a weed or two.
Right.
But in 20 years, we won't have good drinking water, so we need to
Exactly.
decide. But thank you very
Absolutely.
much for answering my question.
Hi. So a year or so ago, when the water quality part of the CPS fund was up for referendum and it was passed, there was a draft plan that was issued, and I know we had a meeting where we saw the draft plan. And has there been a final plan? Is there an update to that plan? Is there something that we can see what the water quality plan is for Southampton?
The draft plan was adopted by the town board. It's available online.
Have there been any changes to it? Is that the same plan that we saw back then?
Yes.
Yeah.
There have not been
Okay, because
changes to it.
I thought there were a lot of open questions in that plan. For example, how we were going to, whether there was going to be a systematic approach as to where septic systems were going to be upgraded in the more critical areas first and then other areas. Was there going to be any kind of systematic approach?
There is a systematic approach for sure. We have the high priority areas and the medium priority areas, which receive the rebate funding, which are our first, what we're targeting.
So the high priority areas get rebates faster than the non-high priority, or what?
The non-priority areas aren't even eligible for a rebate at
So
this
it's
time,
only,
so we're trying
and
to
so
keep.
you'd have to look on that plan to see if you're in the high priority area.
You can even go on our website and type in your address and it'll come up, whether or
Okay.
not you're in the priority area.
Okay, and then just going back to the issue of the hills, it seems to me very illogical to restrict the determination of property value for something like the CPF only to market value for housing, when that's what we're trying to discourage, especially in areas like the hills. And I think if we put in a factoring of environmentally sensitive, we could upgrade the value of that property, and we could have avoided the entire hills debacle. So the only suggestion I would have is that we can't just go at market value, because obviously the developers of the hills saw a greater market value than the people who did the assessment for CPF, because they were willing to go to bat to the extent that they are. So my only suggestion is I think we should factor in environmental sensitivity in that valuation.
That's a great concept, and I was wondering, perhaps Assemblyman Thiel could speak to that. Is it something that could be incorporated into the legislation?
The acquisition of property by a local government or the state government is, the rules are the same, and that is, under the state constitution, you can pay the fair market value of the property, which is determined by its highest and best use. So, in all of these cases, under the Community Preservation Fund, if the town is buying money under the Community Preservation Fund, if the town was acquiring property for any purpose, or the state was acquiring property for any purpose, it is basically a state or a local government can't pay more than the fair market value based on the highest and best use. That's why the towns and or the state, we do appraisals to try to determine what the value of the property is under the highest and best use, and basically that's the rule. So, there's two parts to this. On the one side, you've got the town under the Community Preservation Fund. They're required to put together a Community Preservation Fund project plan, and as part of that plan, they identify which lands are the most environmentally sensitive, what their priorities are for acquisition. But once they've determined what their priorities are, they have to pay the fair market value.
Understood that that is the law as it stands now, and I fully agree that that's the law and that's what they were bound by, and that was not meant to be a criticism of what they've done, because they've abided by the law. What I'm saying is, if we can pass a referendum that carves out a portion of those funds to be used for water quality improvement, can't we pass another referendum that says that those funds, where there are environmentally sensitive areas, can be upgraded in terms of market value?
You can't pay more than the fair market value.
Can you pass legislation that permits that?
Anything above the fair market value would be a gift of public monies, which is prohibited by the state.
What I'm saying is, can there be future legislation that sets parameters as to how you prove what is environmentally sensitive so that it is not a gift, so that if a piece of property meets certain standards, there can be an exponential increase in the market value to purchase that property, to protect it for the residents? All I'm saying is future legislation. It would have to be the legislators who do that, because under current law they are following the law.
Well, it would actually have to be you that would have to do that, because it would require an amendment to the state constitution that would allow local governments to pay more than the property is worth, and that would have to be approved by a referendum of the public.
Okay, for devil's advocate, the developers who want to build hills would violently disagree with what that property is worth, with the people who said 38 million was what that property was worth. So all I'm saying is that the market value is really in the eye of the beholder. We know that. I watched Flip this house or whatever. I mean, market value is what people are willing to pay.
Exactly.
And how important that property is, and that's a fluid thing. So for you to say that there cannot be, a municipality can never determine that a piece of property is worth only X amount and no more, I would argue that that's not true, but that's just me.
In determining values, there are standards for appraisals and determining what fair market value is. We're pretty much bound by that. I don't know whether, in the case of the hills, whether it was a case of they thought the fair market value was higher than what the town was offering, or they believed that they could make a whole heck of a lot more money ultimately developing the property and selling.
I don't think there's a single person in the East End who thinks that they wouldn't have made a boatload of money if they developed that property, far beyond 38 million.
Yeah, but they would have had to make the investments and the improvements to be able to do that. So, the other side of this is, it's one thing to say, well, let's just pay more than fair market value because we think it's environmentally sensitive. There are literally reams of elected officials in Long Island through the history of Suffolk County and Nassau County that have gone to jail for paying more than what property was worth. there are reasons why these rules are in effect, and why towns have to, in fact, towns typically will get not just one appraisal, sometimes they'll get 2 or 3 appraisals to determine what the fair market value is, because you're right. I mean, if you do one appraisal, you oftentimes, you might get, it's an opinion, basically is what it is. It's an opinion. So it's like going to the doctor. Sometimes you want to get more than one opinion. But ultimately, based on other sales and out there, they determine what the fair market value is, and that's what they're bound to have to pay.
Just switch a little bit. Questions for Mary, really. One, the purchase of the property that Ray was talking about for the sewage treatment plant, is the CPF subject? You must be subject to the state environmental laws and required to do EIS, go through an EIS and all that, right?
We are.
So when you buy property with the intent of building, or publicly stated intent of constructing a sewage treatment plant, you still have to go through an environmental review process and a site selection process, don't you?
Well, we're buying the land for its open space value and its potential value as a neighborhood sewage treatment. So there's a potential for that. That's why we're acquiring the land. But there's a lot of steps that have to be taken, including SECRA, before anything ever happens.
So, yeah, I mean, because normally, you could say we're going to buy it, there's the potential use, but you are allowed to buy it even if you hadn't, you're buying it for public space. If you really wanted to do a sewage treatment plant, wouldn't you have to go through SECRA and the site
Yes.
selection process prior to purchasing?
No.
So you can purchase the property with a stated intent,
With this
even though
20%.
that intent may never materialize.
Yes.
And so, in my opinion, sewage treatment plant is great that you bought the property. I'm all for that. But I just feel like that site would never pass muster environmentally for a sewage treatment plant. I'm not an expert on that, but I'm just saying, So I think the concern that suddenly there would be a sewage treatment plant is not realistic, because there are so many studies that have to be done before you could even do that.
I think-
Premature, not realistic, premature.
May I? Yeah. So when the committee looked at that property, first it went to the CPF, land acquisition side. And they said, maybe this would be best suited for water quality, even though it's in the community preservation project plan as a target priority, area, right? Oh, parks, greens, it was in the open space, I'm sorry. It was in the plan as an open space potential area. But the advisory board said maybe this is more appropriate for water quality using that funding stream because of the long-term potential in the future. So, and I just want to mention that a big reason why I'm involved with Mary is because I'm long-range planning. So we're not planning necessarily for 5 years. We're talking like 50 years out.
Okay.
So we are seeing things much further away than maybe people are accustomed to. And it takes a different mindset to look at it that way. So we looked at it as, it can do no harm as preserving it now as open space. That parcel could yield up to 20 residential units in terms of the zoning now, density incentive provisions, and accessory apartment. 10 with 10 accessory apartments. So that would be 20.
Okay.
Sorry, 20, yeah.
So you would be going, but you would.
So the point is that we looked at it and said, okay, there's no harm to purchase it in terms of its acreage now. If there was a 1 acre cluster treatment system, and I'm not talking about a sewage treatment system like you would see in the village of Sag Harbor that treats the whole village, it would be something for that community, so they don't have to go through the situation of, one at a timing these IA systems, which their properties are small and may or may not be able to accommodate. So in some instances, it might be better to do a cluster treatment system. When we get to that point, there has to be a significant amount of secret analysis.
Oh, right,
that
right.
gets
I
done.
just wanted to.
So there can be no
Yeah.
placement of the treatment plant there until
Right.
secret is completed.
That's what I wanted to confirm.
And if we don't use the 20% money now, we can never use that site for,
Yeah, so you lock yourself
Sewage
out. So
treatment.
now
Right,
you
we
have
just
an
use
option
straight CPF.
versus later you don't if you only use the one side.
Right, right. So you should
In fact,
be
it's crazy
buying
you're
more.
doing that.
Well, that's, we hope
Flexibility
to,
in the future.
as much as possible, and in high-density areas where it might be easier for everybody to just have a cluster treatment versus all these individual systems, which ends up being more cost-effective than paying $20,000 in rebates all along.
Yeah, understood.
neighborhood.
It was the environmental reviews and the public hearings and all that I just wanted to confirm that those would come in the future should one ever decide to seriously look at building a sewage treatment plant.
yes.
That's okay. My second question is particularly related to Hampton Bays. So I get a little concerned. I don't know who's on the committee. I understand that they need to have, a certain professional background to be on the committee. And I forget, we are all one big happy town of Southampton, but within the family, we have competition, okay? And so I guess, how is there, it's kind of a two-part question. One, were any of the grant applications that were submitted for anything in Hampton Bays? And aren't we kind of at a, was anything submitted for Hampton Bays?
for the water quality improvement grant money?
Yes.
Yes.
And sponsored by?
We're gonna actually put all this out as a collective group, so I don't wanna precede, so we actually have all the applications that we're gonna post online. We're gonna have hopefully a public hearing for all of them at once, so you can get all the details.
Right, I just feel, and
each
I'm
of
not
them.
advocating, for secession from the town or anything like that. I just feel that, Southampton has a mayor and other places have a mayor and they have people to speak for the town, that we don't have that here in Hampton Bays. And so, just to be kind of aware or interested in knowing that we're getting, for lack of a better phrase, I'm going to call it a fair share of the funds.
Right, so there's going to be, so this was the first funding round. We expect to have at least 2 per year, maybe hopefully more, where we'll open up a round and we'll have a competitive process. And that way the committee is scoring projects against one another.
Right, but it's not realistic to think that a hamlet like Hampton Bays could actually submit a proposal, because I read the proposal requirements and, it's a lot of work. You have to have some expertise.
Well,
And
it
you have
could-
to do estimates and this and that. It's not something that a civic organization can do, so that's kind of what I'm
And you
saying.
don't really
We
need
don't
it.
have-
There's
Well, that's what my
in-house-
concern
yeah,
is, whether
but the
we,
town departments can apply as well. The highway department, CPF, the engineering department, I'm sorry, not CPF, the engineering department, town council people may take up a project individually.
So you can go internally to the town
So you
with
can go,
projects,
if you have a
ideas.
project though. We have, Cornell Cooperative, SOMAS, other scientists
Right,
who
so-
are very interested in, obviously working in Western Shinnecock Bay, and so there's a lot going on actually in Hampton Bays which may be eligible as projects.
Right, but we do, I hear you, I believe you and all that, but I still think that in some ways, we are at a disadvantage because we don't have, the structure, whether it's a political structure or a community structure, that has the expertise and the wherewithal to kind of put together a proposal.
Well,
We don't
actually,
have that.
here's some good news for you. As part of
Yay.
the committee, we are working also on the issuance of RFPs to solve individual problems, where the committee might say, okay, we've got this issue here in Shinnecock Bay, and we need a study, someone to come in and propose a project in this place. So the committee itself can work with an organization like you, and we can put out RFPs to
Right, we
you know,
could
for
help
the
put
town.
out an RFP, but we can't respond to one.
No, I don't know if you do. I'm saying that there's also another track where the town will be, which is contemplated in this plan, where the town itself would be issuing RFPs or, requests for qualifications or things like that to find these very people that you're needing to support this
And
hamlet.
my second question about Hampton Bays. It's the second part of the second question.
Two ways, too big.
Now, there's the pot calling the kettle black. Speaking of Hampton Bays, yes, and the desire to create open space, And I understand that, parcels may be proposed to the committee and so on. And is there any consideration given to the actual density problem, if you will? I don't mean it's a problem, but issue, because we are the most dense hamlet. I'm almost embarrassed to say it, but I went through the plan and I took all the population of Hampton Bays over the years and did comparisons to come up with a cost per resident of money spent on CPF. And, it's a little concern because it seemed, and again, I used old data, so I'm just bringing this up for sort of the hypothetical that we have X amount of people and maybe X amount of dollars should therefore be spent in Hampton Bays versus the other areas that don't have the population. When I used to work, these were things that we had to do to make sure that the city, all parts of the city receive their fair share of these funds. So is there any consideration by the committees to say, well, Hampton Bays has 14,000 people, and I don't know, Southampton Village has whatever they have. More money should be spent in Hampton Bays to preserve the open space of the most dense county. So is there any consideration given to the population and the density before?
It's not a criteria for land preservation, and it's not a pro rata program. You can talk to the folks in Southampton Village, and they tell you that the village that sends the most money into the fund should get the most land. So everybody has their criteria. But we all drink the same water. We all breathe the same air. We all drive by the same farmland and woodlands. So I like to think
We actually don't all drink the same water. We drink different water from the rest of you. So we have Hampton Bays Water District.
I'd just like to point out that you're not paying it, it's only a transfer tax on purchases, so no individual person in Hampton Bays is being taxed right now.
Right, but if you look at it as we're all one big happy family, the parents should treat the children, perhaps according to their needs.
Well, like I said, the Southampton Village criteria, they'd say, well, how much has Hampton Bays put into the fund? That's what they should get out, and you've gotten out probably tenfold what you put in. So you could come up with all different criteria for the different parts of the town to say we should get more of the CPF.
The criteria really was, it's not a revenue sharing fund, and, we try to, balance, and you're right, people, there are, the East Hampton Village and Southampton Village always say they don't get their fair share. But, as I said, it wasn't designed to be a revenue sharing program. The factors that really get considered here is, there's a number of things. First of all, is where are the lands on the basis of the environment for open space or farmland or parks or historic preservation? What are the top priorities? And that really should be how they are ranked in the project plan, number one, regardless of where they're located. And the second thing I always have to remind people is that regardless of what your priorities are, you always have to have a willing seller. You can't condemn the property. So, you could have two properties in two different locations that are equal priorities, and one will get done and the other won't, because in one case you have a willing seller.
I understand all that. I guess my concern is quite simply that Hampton Bays itself has to rely on others to be its advocate, whereas other villages can rely on themselves to be their own advocate. And I just would get
I've been to a few Hampton Bays Civic Association meetings in my time, and I would just say that you guys are pretty good advocates. And the other thing I should point out also, with the land preservation, I think Mary and it's been outlined, whether it's the parcels that were acquired on the ocean, parts of the old nightclubs, or Good Ground Park, and there have been some major purchases here. The water quality program is, it's just authorized, it's in its infant stages, and I think it is something that the Civic should certainly pay attention to. Because I'm not certain. Mary told me, we got all these proposals. I said, well, send them to me, because it isn't, and the jurisdiction for that is the decisions will be made by the town board. But I'm very interested to see. I know what the intention of the water quality program is, but I'm very interested to see how it gets implemented on the local level, and I think the town is working its way through that too. So you have that, and I just want to also point out that when it comes to Hampton Bays, I mean, we do have a portion of this program which hasn't been discussed since I've been here tonight, where lands that are taken off the tax rolls, payment in lieu of taxes, pilots are paid in certain school districts that are in the Pine Barrens that generate a fair amount of money to offset property taxes in the Hampton Bays School District also. So that should be taken into account when you're looking at it.
But I just feel, that all things being relatively equal, that there should be a priority to the most dense hamlet, because the whole idea is to preserve open space and to keep space open. And so if you're choosing between a X acre over there in Sag Harbor and I'm not, $5 million, or X acre in Hampton Bays for $5 million, and things being relatively equal, that being the most dense hamlet should mean a lot in terms of considering what to do.
Thank you.
Scott.
I just wanted to, first and foremost, wish Southern Field a happy belated birthday.
I am now Medicare eligible. Not yet, but thank you for asking.
On the subject of preservation and the environment and water quality, representing the trustees and the treasurer of the trustees, I think that it's a great thing that we're able to utilize this 20% for these water quality projects. The trustees have been working on water quality projects forever. We've been struggling financially for hundreds of years, and it's kind of like everybody's saying, there's some great opportunities here, and I think these great opportunities can pay dividends for everybody in every hamlet throughout the entire township, because if we are able to receive these funds for projects that were referenced earlier, like Mecox Bay, where it's a huge ecosystem that we have to take care of, the trustees have been paying for that out of their enterprise revenue, money that we derive from permit fees and other fees that we get. If that can be freed up under the referendum that we all passed, that allows us to take that money and help rebuild and maintain other infrastructure, docks and bulkheads and boat ramps throughout the community. So the dividends are paid, throughout the entire township. We're a unique township with the trustees controlling and owning the underwater lands and a lot of other lands and some roads, and then we have the town board. So with everybody working together through these working projects and plans to do what's best for the environment and for water quality, that frees up a lot of extra money, not extra money, but other funds to be utilized in other ways, which is going to benefit everybody throughout the entire township. So, I applaud everybody that's working on this. As the Secretary Treasurer of the Trustees, I'm available at any point in time to, help work through any of our applications. Marty Shea was working on putting forth our applications. The trustees are quite complex and at times quite misunderstood. I think that in combination with Senator Thiel, who was successful in getting our tax line legislation through the Assembly, it did get jammed up in the Senate. I really think that we are at a historical point in time for the town of Southampton, the trustees, between perhaps being successful with the tax line, being successful with use of the community preservation water quality, 20%, and freeing up a lot of our other revenues. We really cleaned up our financial house substantially for the trustees. We can really get things done in Hampton Bays and every hamlet throughout the entire township. And I want to applaud you all, and thank you very much. And I'm available to work with you, and I want the public to know that there are additional dividends that get paid, such as I've stated, from being able to access these funds. So thank you all very much. Happy birthday, Ray.
Thanks.
Thank you, Scott.
I just have a couple of finance questions regarding the pilots. So the first question is, how is that determined? Does the school actually have to apply? How long? What's the amount? How long a period of time? Is it 20 years? Is it 30 years? And so the pilot question. Second question financially is, how much money is allocated earmarked for maintenance? So now, is that money now, after you buy the property, how long, if at all, does it get maintained? That's my second question. And the third question, it's come up that there was a know that our development committee has come up in the section of Civic Park to Main Street. One of the things was that it could not be used for revenue generating purposes. So the issue of having like a farmer's market in the Grand Park is to bring the vitality, and the whole purpose of the Grand Park was with Grand Green to bring vitality downtown. And that was supposed to be brought to the leadership's attention to maybe make some changes to the actual rules where there could be some commerce. So the first question is about pilots. How long, how much, how is it done? Second is what about maintenance to all these properties that are buying? Because a lot of them are very run down for many, many years after you purchase them. And then third is what can we do? Bring some vitality to those preserved areas, like with Mount Park. Thanks.
I'll do the pilots. The pilot program basically, any lands that are in the Hampton Bay School District that have come off the tax rolls for the purposes, the same purposes as the Community Preservation Fund, which largely is going to be open space and parkland. Basically, the Hampton Bay School District doesn't have to do anything. Basically, each year the town, those properties and what they were valued at on the assessment roll at the time they were taken off the rolls. So there's an assessment for all these properties. So the Hampton Bay School District gets paid basically dollar for dollar all of those lands that came off the tax rolls for open space. As long as there's a community preservation fund to pay for them, and the community preservation fund is in effect to 2050. So yes, there's no, the sunset on that is the same as the program as a whole. So as long as there's a community preservation fund, Hampton Bays will continue to get those payments in lieu of taxes.
And as long as the town board makes those payments?
Well, the town board has to agree to make the payments each year, which they do. And that's assuming, right now, I think there's a cap on pilots that we never get close to. So, the practical answer is they're going to get paid for those lands. The second one was with regard to maintenance, and it's actually there's 10% of the fund that can be used for stewardship, and stewardship, it's not maintenance per se, garden variety maintenance. Stewardship is defined basically as when it comes to historic preservation, a lot of the, as you say, the hat shop is probably a good example of a CPF purchase where the property needed to be rehabilitated and brought up to, stewardship money to be utilized for that. Maintaining a habitat with regard to open space. There's kind of stewardship activities for a particular piece of open space. You can use that there. So it's limited. It's not everything that you would commonly think of as maintenance, like cutting the grass or things of that nature. But there are certain stewardship things that up to 10% that can be used there. And I think Mary, I don't know if you want to add to that, but that's basically the category there. And then the last part about what you can use parkland for, I'm going to make one comment and then defer to the town. Parkland is parkland is parkland. When it comes to the community preservation fund, if you acquire parkland, there's no separate category of parkland that's just CPF parkland. CPF is a funding mechanism to buy land. It's still what it is. It's open space or parkland. So there's nothing in the CPF law that says, whatever the law is as to what you can use a park for, you can use a park for. And that is a determination that each town makes for themselves as to how they want their property and their public parkland to be used. And it's at that point I'll turn it over to Mary, because I know that the town has some specific rules and regulations that they've had with regard to properties they require.
The 5 extent towns did pass, each one individually passed the same rules and regulations which we use to guide us in stewardship of our properties, including parkland. There has been recently a change in the local legislation to allow some commercial activities for town-sponsored events at particular places, and it was changed for the purpose of the Good Ground Park, because Good Ground Park is probably our first CPF acquisition of a traditional formal park, or our most recent acquisition, our first acquisition of land that was turned into a very formal, active park. So we had to deal with the issue of, well, commercial operations sponsored by the town would be appropriate there because it's a very different type of CPF property. So the legislation was changed to allow that. Now, whether it's appropriate to have commercial activities, even town-sponsored, on other CPF plans, maybe not. But the legislation specifically calls out Good Ground Park and the future Maritime Park and East Quad Village Green, just those three, because they're appropriate for that type of use.
So they could have a farmer's market or?
Not necessarily a farmer's market. Now, that's been determined that we can't have a farmer's market on CPF property.
So what would we allow?
I believe this legislation was focused on a response to the concert activities and having food trucks or other type of vendors at these events. That was the direction of the legislation.
Was it limiting to that?
It doesn't say that that's in the legislation, but that's the impetus for it, was to allow for that, to allow these sort of accessory concessions to park use.
And then farmer's market is definitely not part of that.
Just like fairgrounds or carnivals.
Thank you. I had a quick question. Do you, with density in Hampton Bays, I know at one point there was a small lot acquisition plan that had been put forward. Is that still being used as part of the criteria of properties they can choose?
I don't think it's a formal program, but we definitely look at small parcels, adding green space to subdivisions, certainly. The board does look at that. Particularly as time goes by and large parcels are either being developed or preserved, we'll look more and more at the small parcels, certainly.
I just want to bring up the Bel Air Cove Motel. I was down there with Steve, I wasn't there with Steve Troy. Steve Troy came, he's the head of code enforcement for the town. And he came to the CAC meeting, the last one we had, which was in June. And he said that he actually observed like effluents coming up out of the septic cover there. And my question is, why doesn't someone, like, you got this money, why doesn't someone in the town, you said like the highway department or engineer, why doesn't someone suggest, look, get the grant and let's upgrade your septic system? I mean, we don't have a government structure. We gotta rely on the town. And we don't get the programs. I mean, this is a big problem, which I think eventually will be settled in a court case, because we really are, Hampton Bays, East Quogue, and Flanders are really like over 50% of the town population, but we don't have any representation. It's all at large here. Everybody gets voted at large, and really, I feel in this town, the villages have sway. Again, I mean, you guys don't want to admit it, but they got $10.5 million for 1 acre of land. Now, we have the Bel Air Cove, which has 16 units, which are being used illegally, unsafe, unhealthy SRO, which is a single room occupancy. And it's putting affluents right into the water. Why isn't anything done there? We have this money. I mean, we don't have the structure to apply for it.
Well, I think
so I don't understand.
Ray, I think you have valid points. I think what the town has a resolution they're putting forward.
I know the resolution they're putting
Right,
forward, but
right. But the point about it, whether you agree with it, I mean, I personally.
I don't know if that's going to go forward, though. That's the problem.
They're having a hearing on the 25th, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong.
It's the 25th. It is the 25th.
Yeah. And the project, from my understanding, the project would be to buy the property and then give an action.
Well, why wasn't the CPF ever interested in this property? It's right on the water. It's great.
that she said. I agree with her 100%.
We already
I
brought,
agree with you.
I agree with you too.
All right.
I'd love to.
Why did the CPF ever look at this property? They went, you know, you don't have an answer for it because we don't have a village, and this is what happened. They got $10.5 million for 1 acre of land for water view.
Okay, I appreciate your passion, Ray. We totally have got your point, and I agree.
I'm
I agree
gonna
with you.
invite both of you September 19th, the CAC meeting. We'd love to have both of you there so you could explain this.
Thank you. But I would say that the town wasn't interested in purchasing it and it was staying as there's a lot of code enforcement issues and things like that, so that's a very tricky situation over there. However, let's just say.
The property is for sale.
Sure, let's just say it had nothing to do with the town buying it and somebody there who owned it said, I want to get a new sanitary system here, can the fund pay for that? We would say submit it as a project, and it would be absolutely embraced as a project and potentially eligible for an upgraded system. I think what the supervisor's looking to do is even go a step further in the redevelopment of it. Now, whether or not it should be preserved or redeveloped is obviously up for debate, but in terms of the CPF Water Quality Fund being utilized to upgrade that sanitary system there, that would be absolutely an appropriate use of the funds.
I think is there any other questions? Because we're getting a little late. Our witching hour is 9 o'clock when we all turn into pumpkins. If no other questions from the floor, I don't know if you would like to make just a couple closing comments, or no?
My closing comments are always the same, which is my office is behind the Guava Restaurant across from Scotto's, so you're welcome to come in anytime with any questions. We have a lot of information online, but also if you come into the office and you'd like any information, we keep something called a status report that shows every dollar spent and what we spent it on. So if you need any information, you don't need to wonder about CPF. We have a lot of stats, and we pride ourselves on being very transparent because this is your program. Thank you.
My closing statement would just be that obviously water quality is everyone's problem. It's not something where you can say, well, they'll deal with it over there, and I'm keeping my sanitary system for another 30 years. Eventually, we all have to come to terms with there's got to be another way to deal with the water quality issues. The sanitary systems are going right into the groundwater. It's going right into the bay. We have to deal with that. Everybody who has a house, who has a sanitary system, will have to come to terms with this at some point. And so the more educated you become on it, the more we can help do it collectively, I think the better off everyone will be. And this is the reason for the Water Quality Fund, is because it's basically water quality is community preservation. It's the heart and soul of this place. So it's everybody's problem. And I would urge everyone to get involved however you can.
I'm going to have an opening and closing statement, I guess, all into one. But you know, the Community Preservation Fund was initiated in 1998. It's actually the 20th anniversary of this program now. It's been in effect for 20 years. And you know, and it's not just Southampton, it's all of the 5 East End towns. You know, the 2% real estate transfer tax has generated over $1 billion in that 20 years. Over 10,000 acres of land across the 5 East End towns has been preserved because of it. And you know, it's been a tremendously successful program that has been copied now in many different locations across the state of New York based on the success that we've had with it. And you know, there are a lot of safeguards built into this program. There, you know, first of all was the referendum. So, you know, every time that this program has been extended, it was originally supposed to expire in 2010. Now it's up to 2050. So the voters always have the final say as to what they want to extend it for and how they want to extend it. But, you know, there has to be an independent audit, you have to have the appraisals. There's a project plan. You have a committee, an advisory committee to advise the town board. So, you know, the land preservation program has worked well over that 20-year period. And Mary has been there for most of them. And she is to be commended for doing an outstanding job in implementing this program. Now, that being said, I know that, and because I've heard it here tonight, not everybody likes every acquisition that was made by every town in this program. And I would say that, from time to time, I'll see an acquisition where I might have had a different priority than a particular town board might have had. But the fact of the matter is that, towns have discretion in this program as to what their priorities are. I think to the great degree, they've exercised their discretion and set priorities that have been good overall. And, the program has been a tremendous success. We are in a point now where, we're making some transitions. And that, as Scott mentioned, and, Scott, is, under his leadership and with Ed Warner there, water quality has become an increasing priority for them. They've done an outstanding job in highlighting not just the need to protect water quality, but trying to find the resources to do it. But it became evident to me that while land preservation is extremely important, and we need to finish the programs that we have in place, there's still many parcels that need to be acquired. But the fact is that water quality has become the #1 environmental issue across the East End. And, we're seeing, water quality issues, whether it's from sand mines or emerging chemicals, algal blooms. And, when I first showed up here at the Hampton Bay Civic Association, when I was the town attorney working on comprehensive plans back in the 1980s. The rule of thumb was that a third of the land was developed, a third of the land was served, and a third of the land was up for grabs. That third that was up for grabs now is in single digits. There, basically, most of the land has been spoken for one way or another, and there's still acquisitions to be made. But water quality, people, our economy and our environment both depend on water quality, and that's why we proposed the 20%. That's why close to 80% of the people who live in the town of Southampton voted to extend the program and provide funding for water quality. And, water quality and implementing the water quality component, I think, is more difficult than when we had to do the land preservation, because, the land preservation is pretty simple. It was, identify the environmentally sensitive properties, try to determine the fair market value, and try to determine who are willing sellers. And water quality, I think, requires us to be committed for an extended period of time. It took a long time for our water quality to degrade as much as it has. It's going to take a long time to reverse that, and it's going to require a commitment for a long time. And the other thing is what works and what doesn't work. We know that we need to change the way that we deal with septic waste, and that's a big part of this program. But, some of the other things, including things that were mentioned here tonight, and, proposals such as the ones that the trustees are putting forth, we need to have a measure of success. What works, what doesn't work. We want to make sure that, the money that gets spent on water quality actually improves water quality. So, I think, we have a lot of work ahead of us. The last thing that I would just mention is, when it comes to the Community Preservation Fund, particularly for water quality, there's $2.5 billion of state money that's been devoted to water quality infrastructure that's going to get spent over the next 5 years. All of those state funding programs, which the town is actively pursuing, in a number of cases, they all require local matches. And, having the CPF available as a local match helps us to leverage and gives us a step up with other areas in the state. I'll give you one example. Septic system upgrades. There's $75 million over that 5-year period, $15 million a year for septic system upgrades because of the work that the county has done and the work that Southampton and East Hampton have done with regard to septic system upgrades already, because they had a program on the ground ready to go. Out of that $15 million this year, $10 million of it, came here to Suffolk County. So, it's a way of not just spending our local money, but being able to leverage state money also. So, we're inventing this water quality program. right now, right before your very eyes, and we need your input, we need your help to identify, what the priorities should be. And again, I'm confident it's in good hands with people like Mary Wilson. Thanks.
Well, thank you, and thank all our panelists for coming tonight. We so appreciate the time and effort you put into it. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Janice.